Welcome to Focus SoCal. I'm Tanya McRae. As of this week, the United States has witnessed 400 mass shootings in 2023 and is set to see more mass incidents this year than the past 4 years combined. Since the mid-2000s, the country has seen year after year increases in the number of deaths and injuries from guns. California has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation and boasts some of the lowest rates of gun violence in the country. Yet cities across the state have been touched by the tragedy of shootings and violence from firearms. Nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults has had a family member killed by a gun. I'll sit down with State Senator Anthony Portantino, who is working to pass 2 gun safety bills, one of them sponsored by Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta. But first, meet one woman who has taken her own experience of loss and transformed it into activism to end gun violence.
I love this picture. That's me, and that's my brother Peter. And then I think this is, my parents took us on this cruise down in South America. There's long hair.
Suzanne Verge is showing me photos of her brother Peter, while she tells me the story of when he was 18 years old and at the home of the woman he was dating, when her roommate, who was allegedly paranoid and slept with a gun under his pillow, walked into the living room.
And he came out and he told my brother Peter, "You've got to leave." And Peter said, saw him with the gun, just said, "Just let me get my clothes." And with that, he shot my brother. Then he wrestled, then he turned the gun to shoot the girl Vicky, who my brother was with. He realized what he had done. He dragged my brother's body into the hallway to make it look like a break-in. Fortunately, the other neighbors called the police, but it was too late.
Peter was murdered in 1978, and for many years after his death, Suzanne would send a check here and there to support various gun violence prevention organizations. But it wasn't until the Million Mom March in 2000 that she was compelled to get in the middle of the movement.
There was 2 marches here in Los Angeles, but I had to go to Washington, D.C. I wanted to be the voice for my brother. I remember going to the Million Mom March that Mother's Day. I went by myself, and I'll never forget coming up out of the metro, and there was a sea of people. They said that day there was over 500,000 people. So I realized I wasn't alone. I met so many other people. I met people who only lived a half a mile away from me, who had also experienced the loss. So with that, we all came home and became a grassroots movement.
In 2003, the Brady Campaign and Center to Prevent Gun Violence merged with the Million Mom March to become Brady United Against Gun Violence. There are now 62 chapters across the country and 17 in California, and Suzanne has been the president of the LA chapter since it was founded 23 years ago. The organization's goal is to bring together people of all ages, races, ethnicities, and political affiliations to enact common-sense solutions to end America's gun violence epidemic.
It's the gun manufacturers telling you, you don't need one gun, you need many guns, and you should live in fear. And that's what I'm upset about. I think we hear those stories of kids pulling into a driveway, lost. These people see somebody in their driveway, they've been sold fear, and what do? They go for their gun because they've been sold fear. So that's what I'm upset about, is this fear-mongering.
Suzanne's work as the LA chapter president is oftentimes emotionally and mentally exhausting. Here she is organizing cards for a vigil acknowledging the 102 people who die every day in this country due to guns. But Suzanne channels her own personal grief and loss into helping others.
I can take this wound and I can talk to others, educate others. I belong to a club that nobody wants to belong to. Our numbers continue to grow, and it's just awful.
You watch on the news and hear stories, it's almost become a daily thing in this country, of another person or a number of people getting shot and killed. What is your reaction when you see that again and again and knowing that another family has joined the club that you don't want to be a part of?
It's so heart-wrenching, and it's, when you hear the news, in the past I used to say, like, we're going to organize a vigil, like, let's do something to reach out. We're beyond vigils. Now it's like, we got to raise a protest. We got to be down there and just saying, this is not right, this is not acceptable, and raise our voices.
Suzanne's son and daughter have participated in gun reform marches and rallies alongside their mother their entire lives. And the family's activism has just grown over the years as gun violence numbers have climbed. Does it scare you in terms of what's happening now?
I'll never be scared. The worst has already happened. What else could happen? My brother was already murdered. To me, it's worth it to be out there in the fight.
And for someone like you who has been directly impacted by it and your passion.
Yeah.
I can feel it just hearing your stories.
Oh, don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. I've had them with their assault rifles in my face. And I'm like shaking, but I am like not backing down. I am not backing down. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you got to, it's worth it. This is when they were bringing assault weapons into Starbucks, and they had their ammunition on one side and their assault weapons, and it was just crazy.
According to the CDC, 8 in 10 murders involve a firearm. And in 2021, there were over 15,000 more gun deaths in the U.S. than a decade before. But Suzanne says over the last 20 years in California, as more gun laws have been enacted, the homicide and suicide rates have gone down considerably. However, for those working to end gun violence, there is still a lot of work to be done.
We all come together for certain things, whether it has to be going down to City Hall or even at the LA Board of Supervisors. It's hard work, it's emotional, but it's the most important work I know I will ever do.
To learn more about Brady United against gun violence, head online to bradyunited.org. And coming up, a closer look at new gun safety bills that may soon become law in California. Welcome back to In Focus SoCal. Governor Gavin Newsom and some lawmakers are pushing stronger gun safety measures and protections. Polling data from this year shows that California voters are in support. Twice as many likely voters think it's more important to control gun ownership than it is to protect gun rights, according to the nonpartisan Public Policy Institute of California. Joining me now is State Senator Anthony Portantino, who represents the 25th District. Good to see you again, Senator.
Thank you, Tanya, for having me. Happy to be here.
So you have two gun safety bills that are making their way through the legislature. SB 2 is sponsored by Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta. Can you break down the components of this bill?
Yeah, so the governor and the attorney general, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision on Bruin on concealed carry permits, basically said you can no longer be arbitrary in how you administer the issuance of these permits. They said you have to have concrete criteria. And in California, each sheriff had their own sort of discretionary ability to give out these permits. And so what SB 2 does is it takes the Bruin Supreme Court decision and says California is going to set in place a series of concrete reasons why someone should or shouldn't have a gun. And for example, if you have a history of domestic violence, should we be giving you a gun? If you're on Facebook threatening people, should we give you a gun? The second piece of SB 2 and the Supreme Court said you can have a list of prohibited places, that you don't necessarily need a gun to go to your daughter's AYSO soccer game. You don't need a gun to go to Dodger Stadium. And so SB 2 has a robust list of prohibited places. So even if you have that permit, you can't take your gun to those places. And so we're following the Supreme Court decision. It's the number one high-profile gun safety, gun control measure going through the legislature this year. And obviously, it's important to the governor and the attorney general and Californians as well.
What about SB 368? How would this law ensure Californians are better protected from gun violence?
So I think it's important to know that California's gun laws as a whole make California safer. That's one thing we should tell the public. People always ask, well, do these laws work? And the answer is yes. And we have the data to prove it. There's a gun research arm of UC Davis that crunches the data. So what 368 says is a number of things. We want to make sure that gun dealers have skin in the game. So if you're somebody at home and you're going through some behavioral health crisis and you want to get your gun out of your house, we're going to force the gun dealers to take those guns back and hold them on your behalf. I feel that people who buy guns are probably more likely to trust their gun dealer than they are to go to the law enforcement, the local sheriff station or the police station to say, here, hold my gun. So we're making the gun dealers have skin in the game. The other thing it does is we have a 10-year prohibition list. If you committed certain crimes, you lose your gun rights for 10 years. Right now, it's arbitrary. It says that even if during that 10-year period you violated the provisions of that, what caused you to get on the prohibited list in the first place, if you've committed those offenses again, you still get your gun rights back at the 10-year mark. And what we're saying is if you still have that violent behavior, if you still are not a responsible gun owner, we're going to extend the prohibition list beyond an arbitrary date. And then the third thing it does, and this goes back to Burbank, which is in my district, which has a high concentration of gun. Believe it or not, Burbank, California is the second most saturated city per capita with the number of gun stores in the country. And there was a protest of a new gun shop. And to sort of put salt into the wounds, the gun store did a giveaway of firearm accoutrements to entice more people to come to the store. And so we're saying, you know what, you can't do those promotions, raffles and giveaways to entice more people to buy guns. And so that's in response to what came out of Burbank. And so that's what 368 does. SB2 obviously is in response to Bruin, and then 368 we think is plugging some other loopholes that need to be plugged. And overall, California is safer because we have strong gun control laws.
And in June, Governor Newsom proposed amending the U.S. Constitution to harden federal gun laws and help the country's gun violence epidemic. You have voiced your support for a 28th Amendment and will co-author the Senate resolution that will begin this constitutional amendment process. Why is this proposal the best step forward?
Well, I think it's important because, A, it's leading on an issue. The vast majority of Americans believe in sensible gun control. You know, they think there's a difference between a responsible gun owner and an irresponsible gun owner. They think you should lock your gun up. I tell people, why is locking your gun a partisan issue? When we say lock your car, people of all stripes agree you should lock your car. So why shouldn't locking your gun have the same thing? When we say you have to be 25 to rent a car in California because we recognize that teenagers don't have experience driving, why is saying you have to be 21 to buy a gun? Why is that partisan? It just seems like common sense. And so everybody relies on the Constitution and the Second Amendment. And of course, we know that was written in a different time. And so the social mores, the views on guns in today's America are different than they were in colonial America. And, to have a robust conversation around what the Constitution should or shouldn't say in contemporary society when it comes to weapons, I think is a prudent thing. Is it leadership on the governor's part? Absolutely. Is it a tall order? Of course. But you move the ball forward because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes you have to just step out and say, you know what? If they're going to hide behind the Constitution and frankly use it in a and this is an interesting word, in a liberal context to protect gun rights at all costs, even when it's against the views of the American public and against common sense, we should look at a constitutional convention to say, what does 2023 America believe is the right place to draw the line when it comes to weapons?
Senator Portantino, I know we could talk to you about this for hours. You're very passionate about this topic. Thank you for spending some time with me today and for the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Tanya. Happy to do it.
In Focus SoCal reached out to the National Rifle Association for comment regarding Governor Newsom's proposed amendment. The NRA's statement reads in part, quote, California is a beacon for violence because of Newsom's embrace of policies that champion the criminal and penalize the law-abiding. That is why the majority of Americans rightfully reject his California-style gun control, end quote. More ahead on the topic of gun control and gun rights after the break. You're watching In Focus SoCal. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Focus SoCal. As the U.S. sees a rise in the number of injuries and deaths from guns, organizations are working tirelessly to educate the public and policymakers about the consequences of gun violence and helping to pass impactful legislation. Joining me now is Megan Oddsen from Women Against Gun Violence. Good to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much, Tanya, for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Megan, in recent years, the city of Los Angeles has seen a steady increase in gun violence crimes. According to LAPD open crime data, shootings in the city of Los Angeles on average over the last 3 years were 37% higher than the average 3 years before. How has WAGBA been working to help reduce gun violence?
Well, Women Against Gun Violence is a 30-year-old nonprofit organization, and we work to stop gun violence through legislation at local, state, and federal levels, through programming and education around safe gun storage, voting, and divestment, and also through raising awareness that gun violence is a public health crisis and it should be treated as such. Here in LA, we also support a number of holistic approaches through partnerships with organizations working to break cycles of gun violence at community levels. Groups like Urban Peace Institute and the Children's Institute that have a long history of really thoughtful local solutions. We do know that there was a national spike in crime that started in 2019 that worsened across the pandemic. Homicides, however, are starting to fall a bit, but they're still at a number higher than in 2019. I think in addition to policy and awareness, renewed efforts around community building, community policing, and violence intervention will be incredibly important proactive steps toward public safety for here in LA and in communities all over the country.
And WAGVA has an initiative called the Talk Project, which aims to keep guns safely stored and out of the hands of those who could abuse them. Tell me more about that.
Well, we believe that safe gun storage saves lives, particularly those of curious children and adolescents and of those contemplating suicide. Every day there seems to be a new story of a child dying because they accessed an unsecured firearm. There was, unfortunately, an incident just in San Diego just this week of a 3-year-old who shot and killed her 1-year-old sibling unintentionally. We also know that school shooters and mass shooters often get their weapons from homes where they haven't been securely stored. So the Talk Project was really designed to raise awareness around all of these issues. It's a 30-year-old program, originally started in 1993 as Keeping Him Safe, and we rebranded as the Talk Project in 2013. We really consider it to be more of a parental and caregiver empowerment project because it is geared towards adults. It includes educational literature in the form of brochures and one-sheets on how to talk to your kids about guns, as well as how to talk to other parents, friends, and neighbors in whose homes your children might spend time. We then often pair those materials with speaking events at schools and other community and public events. It's a free service we provide in multiple languages. We currently have brochures in English, Spanish, Armenian, and Korean. And we will also have materials in Filipino and Mandarin as well shortly. And we do have a website if you'd like to learn more about the project. It's called thetalkproject.org.
As a board member of WAGVA, you are the chair of the Local Community Action Committee. What are you doing on that committee to make LA communities safer and to inform people about gun violence? You talked about the flyers and some of the efforts. Do you need to expand on that a little bit more? I mean, it sounds like you all are really on many different levels trying to reach on a grassroots level as many people as you can.
Yeah, so in my role at WAGVA, I meet with city council members and community members across different jurisdictions on things they can do as public servants and as activists to prevent gun violence locally. For community members, we provide a lot of education on local process, city council meetings and agendas, how to pass an ordinance, and then we really try to empower city leaders to enact policy that'll protect their communities and ultimately serve as an example for other cities. So that involves taking a look at what gun control laws a city already has on their books and then kind of helping them fill in the gaps by suggesting things they might not have yet. With the County Board of Supervisors recently passing new regulations for unincorporated LA in February, a lot of our work recently has been focused on making sure individual cities know about those and getting them started on passing them as well, simply because we know that the more cities that adopt them, the more effective they'll actually be in preventing gun violence in the region.
And Megan, you are a mother and an active member in your local school community. How do you feel when you hear the news about yet another shooting at a school? It must be terrifying on so many levels.
Yeah, it does terrify me, and it also makes me really sad. It's nothing compared to the grief that families of gun violence experience, or families of victims of gun violence experience. but it's enough to make me want to join their fight to end gun violence. There have been almost 400 mass shootings this year and 24 school shootings. And I don't know how people can process that and not want to do something. I know a lot of people have this idea that it simply won't happen to them in their town or to their kids. And I'm sure no one in Uvalde or Parkland or in Newtown ever thought it would happen to them either. And you know, it's gotten to a point where it's not even really just about our kids or your kids or my kids. It's about all kids.
Right.
It's about everyone now. So it just makes me feel like we have to keep pushing. As parents, we know that there's no way to fully protect our children from anything in life, but we do try to protect them the best we can. And in this moment, I really believe that involves pushing for stronger gun regulation.
Megan, I appreciate the work that you're doing to keep our communities safe. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this edition of In Focus SoCal. You can reach us at infocussocal@charter.com. And of course, you can send me a message on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.